Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, fellow marketers. I'd like to start by thanking Dan. He's given me some insight into my own motivation, which has made coming here today really, really worthwhile. And I'll talk about my alternative job title a bit later. It's a pleasure and a privilege to speak here today. I have, as you've heard, had quite a long association with the Marketing Society. I joined the committee in the early 1980s and was lucky enough to be chairman in 1982-83, before some of you here were born. And I've been a sort of fellow forever. The Marketing Society conference was already going strong then, so it goes back a long way. And my contribution was to launch the accompanying dinner, the Marketing Society dinner, and also the Marketing Society Awards, both of which in one form or another are still taking place. So it's a great pleasure to see that the society has gone from strength to strength over not just years, but decades, and I think it's had some great people leading it over that time. Now, in recent years, you, the society, have been focusing us on the need to be brave, and that does appear to me to be relevant and resonant. I'd put it, though, slightly differently. We all have our own sort of vocabulary we're comfortable with. I believe marketing has a continuing responsibility to challenge the status quo in the face often of inertia and hostility. I echo what Dan had to say. I think a lot of people find it very easy to get comfortable with what they're doing. They don't really want change. It's human nature, I think, for many of us to be comfortable with where we are and therefore to sort of resist change, to feel uncomfortable about it. But I think marketing people realize, or should realize, that standing still will never be sufficient. Consumer needs are constantly evolving and changing. Competitors are upping their game all the time. Technology is making it relatively easy to disrupt entire industries. And marketing people, I believe, need to force their colleagues to recognize the need for change and to play their part in making it happen. I guess you can call that being brave. In 1982, when I became chair of the society, my day job was as marketing and buying director of FineFare, a supermarket chain. We introduced yellow packs, the first generic products in the UK, and pack your own at a time of quite deep recession in the UK, where we were trying to respond to the need of many of our customers for value and to achieve some form of competitive differentiation. Both were extremely successful. At the time, we didn't feel we were being particularly brave, but with hindsight, perhaps we were. It's great, by the way, to see the wheel has gone full circle and that simply packaged or unpackaged product is back in favor again now, but for an entirely different set of reasons. Now, when I look at my own career, I can see quite a lot of examples where I've argued for and insisted on change. Some of them have been successful, some not. And I've occasionally risked unpopularity and perhaps occasionally my career. But I never regarded that as being particularly brave. I don't see myself as being in the same class as a firefighter who climbs into a burning building to attempt to save lives. To my mind, that's a different sort of bravery from the one that I've ever managed to show. And of course, challenging and being brave doesn't always lead to success. We need to create organizations, I think, where it's possible to try and fail, where it's recognized that progress is not a straight road, that you may have to explore a number of routes before you find the right one, where the personal consequences of failure are not so severe as to deter anyone from ever trying to innovate again. And what I'm conscious of is that in my career, while there have been some successes, there have also been a significant number of failures. And I think I've learned more from the failures than from the successes. One of the things I learned, I bought a business in the late 1980s, small business, fortunately, where I discovered that while it's extremely difficult for profits to exceed 100% of revenue, it's distressingly easy for losses to exceed 100% of revenue. I call that Allan's first law of the asymmetry of business. I don't know if it's ever been taught in a business school, Dan, but I think it should. So, there is an asymmetry, I think, of sometimes of risk and reward. But you've got to, I think, create an organization where that's possible. If you're an individual, particularly in a relatively junior role, in an organization with a strong sense of what it values, it can require real bravery to speak up and challenge. I was lucky enough to start my career in Unilever as a kind of Unilever management trainee. I don't know if there's anyone here today else who's ever worked for Unilever. Show of hands, please. A few, not many. But one of the great things about the company I worked in, Lever Brothers, was that, one of the things you learnt as a young brand manager was to make judgments about advertising. And advertising is intrinsically quite difficult to make judgments about. It's not sort of hard. It's quite a kind of soft skill. And so we would troop along to the advertising agency to see some storyboard or rough cut film or whatever. And because there were lots of layers of management in those days in the company I worked in, Lever Brothers, there'd be a sort of junior brand manager like me and a senior brand manager and a marketing manager and an advertising content manager and perhaps an advertising director. So I would be the junior amongst 5 or 6 people. But the rule at Lever Brothers was always that when the work was shown, the most junior person had to comment first. So actually, you weren't able to sit there comfortably listening to your elder and some betters making judgments about this and then chime in with, I agree with Fred or something. You actually had to stand up and be counted and form your own judgment about the work. And sometimes you kind of got it right. And sometimes by the time the second or third or fourth person commented, you realized that you'd got it kind of spectacularly wrong. But, I think one learnt from doing all of that. And I think we ought to encourage that sort of behavior, encouraging and requiring people to stand up and be counted in whatever organization we're involved in. Now, on a slightly broader canvas from the individual, I believe strongly that companies have to discover and make explicit and be driven by a clear sense of purpose. And I think some of the best known marketing-led companies and indeed the Marketing Society have shown the way on this. If we are to remain relevant to consumers, remain able to recruit and retain young talent, be respected in society, and be successful in the long term, then I think we have to demonstrate very clearly that we recognize that we owe it to society to do more than just make profits. And there's nothing wrong with making profits, but we need to do more than that. And I think over the next few years, the pace of change for all of us will increase. Technological progress, growing concerns about climate change and sustainability, changing social and political attitudes, they're all sort of coming our way. And I think that makes life actually quite interesting and quite exciting. And we have to recognize that the standing of business in the UK and most other developed economies is pretty low. We're better regarded than politicians and journalists, but that's a low bar to leap over. And I think having a clear purpose that's relevant to society can help the long-term task, and it will be a long-term task, of rebuilding trust in business and indeed other institutions. In the shorter term, it can help too. We're aware of the concerns amongst many people, particularly the young, about plastics. A year ago at Tesco, we got a bunch of our young graduates together to work on ways of eliminating or reducing plastic usage, kind of basically locked them up and said, don't come out till you've got some answers. That project led directly to the pledge we unveiled a few days ago to eliminate 1 billion pieces of plastic from our business by the end of 2020. Not, in the long term, but in the relative short term. And frankly, that's just a start. Tesco has shown, I believe, real bravery in other ways too. One of the joys, by the way, of being chairman is that you don't feel the need to take credit for it. Because you're not involved in creating this stuff, you don't feel the need to take credit for it. But I think we've created some great advertising campaigns based around, for example, food love stories, getting consumers focused on food. Very unconventional for a supermarket, but something that's resonated very, very strongly with our consumers. Similarly, our focus on encouraging customers to eat more healthily and the sort of retro centenary campaign we ran this year have worked well. Now, as I said, I take no personal credit for these campaigns, but I'm delighted that many of the Tesco marketing team are here today, and I think they deserve huge credit for being willing to challenge the conventions of retail food advertising, and I'm very proud to be associated with such a talented and innovative team. They're great. By the way, look out for our Club Card Plus campaign, which started to air 48 hours ago, and you can actually join from Friday and save even more money. Now, let me finish by telling you a short story about real bravery in a different field. About a year ago, I met a group of young people from pretty disadvantaged backgrounds in London, and I asked them what they wanted to do when they finished their education, and they all sorts of different things. But one young man said to me he wanted to become president of Afghanistan. I thought, well, at least he knows what he wants to do. A few weeks ago, I got an email from New York from a philanthropic organization saying they'd given this young man a scholarship, and he'd asked if I would become his mentor. And I reacted and said yes within nanoseconds. And we met up recently, and he told me his backstory. He was born in a rural area of Afghanistan where there were no schools. When he was 12, his uncle was assassinated and his father decided to come to the UK. His father became a minicab driver. This young man didn't speak a word of English. He'd never been to school, but he was pitched into a big comprehensive in southeast London, sort of sink or swim. And clearly he managed to swim and he worked hard. And when he got to the sixth form, he told the school that he'd decided he wanted to go to Oxford. The school's response was, don't waste your time. You'll never get the grades you need. No one from this school has ever been to Oxford. Well, I'm pleased to say he's just successfully completed his first year at Oxford. Now that seems to me to be real bravery, coming from starting with nothing, with huge disadvantages, and actually by sheer determination and clearly a lot of talent, making it through. Now, just to finish on my own favourite job title, which again, what Dan resonated, people don't really understand what a chairman does. They think it's terribly important and it sounds terribly sort of, hierarchical. And I go around Tesco saying to people, no, I'm not the person who runs the company. That's Dave Lewis, our CEO. So people say, well, what do you do? And the best encapsulation I've come up, my own job title is, I now describe, everyone nowadays has to be a chief something officer. I describe myself as being a chief helping officer because actually what turns me on is helping people to achieve what they want to achieve, making a contribution that way. So I feel much more comfortable with that title than something that's very hierarchical. Anyway, my time's up. Thank you very much for listening.